Hi guys, Super Secret Tech here. I'm going to go over a kind of a more rogue deck that I've been working on. The last one was my twist to American mid-range, and so I figured it's probably time to do something a little different and go with some a little more brewed out. Um, First off, running a ton of basic lands in this deck. Uh, there's a very good reason I'm doing that. Um, but basically, the deck functions just fine, even with all these basics. Um, I'm running 4 Steam Vents and 4 Sulfur Falls. The reason I'm choosing not to use the sack lands in this is for one of the cards in my sideboard, and these just seem better. One Videlkin Shackles. This is really good against the aggro matchup like game, or like the Tron decks, because like if they get an Iona out, you can still win because you can steal the Iona and beat them to death with it. Um, and it also depends on what they put Iona on, whether it even affects you or not. Um, then the counter suite is 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Spell Snares, 3 Mana Leaks, and 3 Cryptic Commands. Originally I was running all soft counters except for Spell Snares, and I just realized that you really need the Cryptic Command in this style of deck. Because it's very mid-range-ish, but with a combo. Um, the Izzet charms are there because you can either use them as a counter against the control matchups, or you can use them as removal against aggro. Electrolyze is one of the cards I debated. Um, Ultimately, what made me go down that road is that I was running 1 Pyroclasm main deck, and I realized if I ran 4 Electrolyzes over 4 Think Twices, that I could get down to 3 Pyroclasms against really heavy aggro I was having a lot of trouble with. So the 4 Electrolytes really help out against that. It's also good against control decks because you can just start burning them to the face, um, where you can turn other spells lethal with it. And you have enough removal in here that you can actually just burn them out too. That's a possibility. Of course, 4 lightning bolts, they're just the best 1 mana removal. And in this deck, they can also be an ancestral recall, which is really, really cool. Shadow of Doubt, I was having a really hard time with Birthing Pod, Tron, and Skate Shift. And the Shadow of Doubts have really, really helped with all those matchups. Uh, the one Seismic Assault main and one Seismic Assault on the board is for this guy right here, Swans Brian Argle. Um, Basically, this is what turns Lightning Bolt into an ancestral recall. So the reason Seismic Assault is good is you can pitch a land and draw 2 cards to Swans, or you can just burn them out in the face. Um, the reason that I'm only running 2 and only 1 main deck is because of another sideboard card uh, that I'll get to here in just a minute. But it makes it where they're normally not going to see the Seismic Assault game 1 unless it's like control versus control. Um, which is really good because it makes their sideboard plans really hard against you. Uh, Blasphemous Act, the reason it's over here in the combo pile is because Blasphemous Act with the Swans out, not only does it wipe the board, but you draw 13 cards. Um, I've never not resolved Blasphemous Act and won the game. So it's really, really good. Um, with the Swans out, I should say. I think I've resolved it once without a Swans, and it just stabilized the board for me. But with the Swans out, if you can get Act to go off, it's pretty ridiculous. Drawing 13 cards for how, even if you have to pay the 8 mana for it, is still really good. And then Snapcaster Mage is just our utility enabler. You can get more Shadow of Doubts versus Scape Shift and Pod. You can get more Burn versus Aggro. You can get more counters versus Control. Um, let's move on to the sideboard. Blood Moon is the reason that we're playing a lot of basics. This deck functions really well with Blood Moon. Um, some decks that run Blood Moon are okay with Blood Moon, but they don't function well with Blood Moon. What I mean by that is like the blue-red fairies deck. It's okay with Blood Moon, but you really need that blue mana. Uh, in this deck, basically the way I look at it is that pre-board, my steam vents are islands. Post-board, my steam vents are mountains. Um, if I'm going to bring in Blood Moon, I'll normally take Shackles out just because it loses a lot of its value with not having so many islands main deck. But it's really good. Like, I've completely shut down uh, Tron and Pod decks and Scape Shift decks because I run counter magic with the Blood Moon. Um, it makes it where normally once it sticks, they normally can't answer it that turn. It normally takes more than a turn to answer Blood Moon. And by the time they can get an answer, I can counter it. Um, so if you do decide to pick up this deck, it's really important once you cast Blood Moon to either do it when you can counter, like that's why there's Spell Pierce and Spell Snare, um, or if you're going to cast it, like if you go first and cast on turn 3 and they have 2 non-basics out, you're probably fine. Just when you untap, make sure that you keep up counter magic. Basically for the rest of the game. It's well worth it. Because if they can't deal with your Blood Moon, you normally just auto win the game because the Swans just becomes lethal and just swinging for 4 every turn. Because that's where most of their removals at uh, to stop you and to counter you and all that is normally in their lands. Um, it's really good against almost everything in the meta. Counterflux, the reason behind this is the big spells. Um, we have a lot of conditional counters, but against the decks that cast really big spells that you just have to answer, the 2 counterfluxes normally are going to come in for either Spell Pierce, Smell Snare, or Izzet Charm, just depending on the matchup. The Guttural Response is an interesting card. The reason that I'm running that instead of Dispel is because of the Blood Moon. Because you'll find sometimes that when you play Blood Moon, especially if your opponent is playing counters, that you don't always have a lot of blue untapped because you're having to use your blue to play things like Swans or to play things like Snapcastering to remove a creature. So the Guttural Response lets you counter a counter with either a Steam Vents, a Sulphur Falls, or a Mountain because post-board, all those are basically just mountains. Um, in most matchups. Some matchups, obviously, you're not going to bring in the Blood Moon. The other thing is, even like against Blue-Red Fairies, Guttural Response is really good just because of the fact that it's a surprise card they're not expecting in a counter deck. If you have one red open, they're expecting like a lightning bolt, especially after game one. Um, and then when you pop the Guttural Response and stop them in their tracks, it's really, really powerful. The other thing is it's a hard counter. So against like blue, white, red flash, you can pay 1 red and counter Cryptic Command, which is really powerful as well. Um, Pyroclasm's in here, again, for the aggro decks, um, or anything that is creature-based. Um, like, I'd even bring it in for fairies. The reason that I'm running Pyroclasm and not Volcanic Fallout um, is because I haven't played against the fairies deck enough to make it justifiable to pay the extra red uh, to have the uncounterable. If I start seeing like a whole lot more of the blue-red fairies, I'll probably go to Volcanic Fallout. But so far it hasn't made that big of an impact where it's like really bothering me. The other Seismic Assault is really good against control and really good against creature heavy decks. So like Birthing Pod it's really good against. It's really good against the mid-range and late game decks, like well, like blue, white, red, for example, American mid-range. It's really good against that. Because basically, once you resolve it, you can decide if you want to play a land or just hit them in the face for 2 or blow up a creature. Um, the reason I'm running Shatterstorm is because even though Blood Moon is really good against Affinity, they run Mox Opal, and they also run uh, the Etched Champion, which Etched Champion is really hard for me to deal with. The only way I can really deal with it besides countering it is to bounce it with Cryptic Command and then counter it, which is an awful waste of mana. So I decided to put in 2 Shatterstorms. The other thing with the way this deck works, because you're running 26 lands, is a lot of times it's okay to mull down. It mulligans really well, so you can mulligan down, you know, to 6 or 5 to get either a Blood Moon or a Shatterstorm. Or if you have like a really strong opener where you have like lots of control magic, that works too, pretty well against Affinity. But basically, you can almost always stabilize till you can hit like turn 6 or 7. That's when the constant pressure starts really affecting you. And so that's why I chose Shatterstorm, is because basically if it resolves, then you just win the game. Because it destroys almost everything in their board. And what it doesn't destroy, Blood Moon destroys. And you're normally going to have a Blood Moon out before you get a Shatterstorm. So if you play Blood Moon and, even if they can remove it, then you Shatterstorm, they're stuck on a land or two, and you can normally just go through them anyways. I mean, even if they have like the infect creature, because you have Electrolyze, Izzet Charm, and Lightning Bolt, you can just keep blowing up their guys. Um, Spell Snare is against the Tarmogoyf decks. Um, Tarmogoyf's pretty hard for this deck to deal with um, early in the game. And so, like, against a deck that is running, like, especially the ones that are running, like, Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant and uh, Scavenging Ooze, having 4 hard counters that you can play on turn 1 is pretty important. And so that's the reason that I pulled the Spell Snare into the sideboard. Um, and then that one, it really depends on the deck list that you see. Um, Normally, I leave in the Spell Pierces against that deck as well, um, which would seem like the logical thing to take out. But it's actually really good at stopping turn 1 Thoughtseize, because they normally run 2 main deck and 2 in the board. And some of them even run Inquisition of Kozilek. So it's pretty important to be able to turn 1 either Spell Snare or Pierce, um, if you're on the draw. And then if you're on the play, it's not as bad. But like if you can play turn 1 Steam Vents, untapped, pay the 2 life, shock yourself, and then have a Lightning Bolt, a Spell Pierce, and Spell Snare up, it's pretty ridiculous. Just because those kind of decks have a really hard time dealing with a hand like that, and you'll get them. The other thing is Shackles is really good in that matchup, because you can Shackles a Goyf and block with a Goyf and then just hit their Goyf for extra damage. Um, and Cryptic Command's really good in that matchup, because you can either stop their team from swinging and make the Dark Confidant kill them, which I've done a couple of times, or you can also, counter something that's important and bounce, an aggro creature back, so it saves you a turn. The other thing that's good in that matchup is the Blasphemous Act, because it wipes their whole board. I've tried running more Blasphemous Act. I've actually tried running 3 Blasphemous Act and 0 Seismic Assaults. Um, but when I did that, it was hard for me to win the game. Um, but like in the control mirror, you're definitely going to want to bring in the Seismic Assault from the board. In most decks, though, you really just need the 1, because the 1's really useful if you Swans and Act and you get 1, because then you can just discard all your lands and kill them. Um, because you also have to realize that because the amount of burn that we're running in here, that it's very possible that you can throw, 3 or 4 lands and they're just dead. Um, it's a lot less combo-y than the traditional Swans decks, but it's a lot more stable and resilient in the current metagame. I hope you enjoyed it.